Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, what do you say today? Let's make some news. The subtitle for the show is News, Blues, and Interviews. And joining us on the phone today is a real newsmaker, and that's Representative Eric Swalwell. And I'm going to read a little bio from the representative. A lot of folks may be familiar with him. He's been all over the news. He's on the House Judiciary Committee. He's top of mind with a lot of folks here in Iowa. He's been testing the waters and making some personal appearances, and I saw him just in the past week or so, and that's when I decided I had to get him on the podcast. But here's a little backgrounder for people that need it. Congressman Eric Swalwell represents California's 15th Congressional District, which includes a large portion of the East Bay. In January 2019, he was sworn in for his fourth term already in the U.S. House of Representatives, continuing his work to bring new energy, and that's an important term, new energy, ideas, and a problem-solving spirit to Congress, and advance policies that will support equality, opportunity, and security. Congressman Swalwell is co-chairman of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, which helps set the policy agenda and makes committee assignments for the caucus. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, where he chairs the Intelligence Modernization and Readiness Subcommittee, and also serves on the Committee on the Judiciary. Swalwell also founded and is Chairman Emeritus of Future Forum. Now, that's a group of more than 40 young House Democrats focusing on listening to and addressing the needs of millennial Americans. God, I just love that. Now, Congressman Swalwell was born in Iowa, Sac City area, as I understand, and raised in Dublin, California, earned a bachelor's in law degrees from the University of Maryland. He then returned to the East Bay to serve the cause of justice and protect victims as a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office for 7 years. He was elected to the Dublin City Council in 2010. He's the oldest of four sons of Eric Sr., a retired police officer, and Vicky, who works as a secretary. Well, right off the top, let's talk a little bit of news. Since I've got you on the phone, there's some talk, some concern about this Mueller investigation, Eric Swalwell, a possibility that it may be circumvented or brought up short by the new AG, William Barr. Are you hearing anything to that effect? I think you kind of sent out a wording today that better not be the case.
That's right, George. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah.
It was nice to see you the other night, and I am concerned that this report is being forced out because Barr, the new Attorney General, wants to close down the investigation rather than Mueller saying that he followed all the evidence, interviewed all the witnesses, looked at all the documents, and he's ready to make a report. If that's the case, I welcome it. I think most Americans welcome it, but I won't believe it until I hear that from Bob Mueller. I'm not going to take the word of any Trump administration official. They are just completely unworthy of being taken at their word, considering the obstruction we've seen for the last 2 years. But Iowans put us in a position to be able to do something about it. He gave us two terrific women that gave us the majority, in Cindy Axme and Abby Finkenauer. So people can be assured that we're going to do our job and make sure the rule of law still stands.
Yeah, things have changed. People are becoming aware of that because of the most recent election. As you mentioned in a tweet today that I saw, we're no longer powerless, meaning the House of Representatives. You guys have got a little bit of a hammer now, correct?
We do, and we're just learning to carry ourselves with the confidence of this new oversight ability that we have. Because just like so many Iowans for 2 years, we were really concerned about the direction of our country, and mostly felt like we weren't able to stop this wrecking ball. And now we carry ourselves with the confidence that yes, these abuses will still continue, but the voters gave us power on the inside to stop them. And so through oversight hearings, through subpoenaing documents that can put more transparency into what I think has been a dark and corrupt government, we can intervene and make sure that rule of law that protects everything we have, freedom of speech, free markets, and freedoms to dream, that still stands.
Well, and I'm glad you're on the case. I'm glad you're a watchdog, one of many for this, but you're well suited to it, and your background and experience shows that. So I'm glad that you're keeping an eye on this. And going back to this appearance that I saw, and I got to mention, you're kind of out moving around the state of Iowa, testing the waters, as they call it, or taking a look at the political landscape. And there's some potential for some big news from you here shortly. I'm looking at you, meeting you for the first time, and here's my impression, my takeaway, and maybe I hope I'm like a lot of people. Representative Swalwell is 38 years old. He would be the youngest president ever elected to the office if that were to be the case. And I'm looking at you, and I'm listening to you, and I'm listening to the issues that you delineated at the meeting that I was at. And I tell you, it wasn't exactly like Bobby Kennedy, but it wasn't far off. And I'm old enough that I remember the types of issues and the types of things that Bobby Kennedy had to say. And this energy, this youthfulness that you have is great. I've been telling people all along, I don't know why or how we came to the understanding or belief in this country that old guys, old men particularly, were best suited to serving office and being president of the United States. The way that I put it to people is, there's nothing else that a 70 or an 80-year-old does better than a young man. Why would that be the case when it comes to the presidency? I don't do anything as well as I used to, and I'm not near that old. So, I mean, that's the way that I look at it, and I love that vibrancy that you've got for the office.
Thank you, George. You know, George, I've been coming to Iowa because I feel that I owe a great debt that must be repaid to Iowa. It's where I first learned the promise of America, and saw two parents who believed that if they worked hard, they could do better and dream bigger. And my dad was a police officer in Algona, and my mom raised us boys and made dollhouses in the garage and baked wedding cakes in the kitchen and sold them to the community. And they believed that if they just kept their head down and followed the rules and worked hard, that we could eventually one day, live in a good school district that could prepare me for college, buy and have our own home in a community near where my parents worked, and that I could go off, to college. And so they chased that dream all over, from Iowa to Oregon to California, and they put me to work as soon as I could because they wanted me to know the value of it as well. And so now today that I've benefited from that, part of the benefit of it is that I've been able to see that too many people in America are not feeling and benefiting from that promise, that it's not going to every block of every street or every floor of every building, and that I have a responsibility to do all I can to make sure it does. And so that's why I come back to Iowa. That's why I'm considering running in 2020. And I think the way to fulfill that promise is to have a vision where you go big on the issues you take on. So no more incrementalism and shut down politics governing crisis to crisis, where we would be bold in the solutions that we offer and seeing an opportunity here, and that the solutions are a big blank whiteboard where we don't have to be wed to the solutions of the past, but on healthcare, we can have universal healthcare. On college, we could have a college bargain where if you work through college, you come out and serve a community in need and have a debt-free education. And on energy, that we could green the grid and catch up with Iowa when it comes to renewables. So go big, be bold, and then do good in the way that you govern, meaning that you operate from a core set of principles, not transactionally, and that you would clean our government of dirty maps and dirty money so that everyday Americans could have their voices empowered rather than silenced.
Well, next time he comes back to Iowa, folks get a chance. If you can go out there and see Representative Swalwell, do it, because the thing that I was impressed with is, and again, maybe this just has to do with the fact that you're younger and you haven't got entwined in these partisan talking points. I get a real sense of independence and speaking your own mind when I listen to you. And one of the things that you got behind here recently that is big on my podcast and that I've talked about a lot is the protection of journalists. And actually, you've suggested or introduced a Journalist Protection Act. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and so, George, and that independence is also rooted in, two parents who are Republicans. And my brothers are all Republicans. And if I want them to see me on TV, I have to go on Fox News. So that's why I go on Fox News. To communicate to them and the president. And so, I think that has helped me actually, having family members who are Republicans and marrying a wife from southern Indiana who comes from a conservative area as well. But, when it comes to, the freedom of our press, it's one that, we all hold dearly because it, distinguishes us from countries that don't have those freedoms and where, leaders can suppress truth and they can, have their will, without, being held accountable. And so I wrote that bill, the Journalist Protection Act, because I saw the president was continuing to call the press the enemy of the American people and that violence against journalists was on the rise. And I wanted to make sure that there was a federal statute that made it a crime if someone committed violence against a journalist. And so I'm hoping, to see that passed in the House and have it, also passed in the Senate. And it probably will take a Democratic president to sign it. But, I value our free press so much that I want to make sure that it's, enshrined in the criminal statute.
Well, good on you. And here's what I would say about that. I've talked to some people about it, and they say, well, there are laws on the books. We don't necessarily need a federal law. I mean, if somebody takes a poke at a journalist or takes them down at a public event, which has occurred already, just take it to a local magistrate. Well, the problem with that is, just like with a police officer or with a judge or somebody else that's working on a federal level, you just can't punch these people. You can't wrestle them to the ground. What they're doing is too important. It has a chilling effect. You just can't have a $25 assault and battery charge in front of a local magistrate that may or may not do anything about it. There has to be some more meat on this bone, and I really like the sound of the Journalist Protection Act. But like you say, hopefully we'll have a Democratic president that can do something about that. The other thing that impressed me, you're not afraid and you're not backing away from some common sense gun limitations. Can you explain to us your thinking on that?
Well, George, I think that most Americans, love their kids more than they love having, the most dangerous guns in the hands of the most dangerous people. And so, I'm not going to negotiate down with the NRA. For too long, too many children sit in their classrooms with fear that they'll be the next victims of a mass shooting. And that fear is rooted in a Washington that has failed them and that has not put in place the reforms that would have background checks on every firearm purchase, that would ban and buy back every single assault weapon, because we recognize that an assault weapon can do much more damage than a long rifle that you would hunt with for a deer, or a shotgun that you would use to protect your house, or a pistol that you would use to go shoot for sport, and that we can have those in our community, but say that an assault weapon, which you could just indiscriminately spray a crowd with a pistol grip, with no expertise, and still cause a number of casualties, that should be treated differently. And then finally, investing in gang violence prevention programs so that even in our cities, we're making sure that gun violence is addressed. So I'm ready, again, on that issue to go big and be bold, because I see the NRA as a paper tiger, and even their own members believe in most of these gun reforms, and so it's time to start standing up.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And my little spin on that, for what it's worth, I'm a huge First Amendment right advocate as far as making sure the press isn't infringed upon. But when like violent pornography, let's say, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Podcast by George isn't coming out and saying we can't do anything about that because it might infringe on our right to print a daily newspaper or to have a podcast, that the New York Times won't be able to go to press if we try to prohibit violent pornography. Well, we've done that. That's common sense. I mean, that's something that we do with the First Amendment. Why can't the same thing be done with the Second Amendment?
That's right. I think, the well-regulated, phrase of the Second Amendment is too often lost. But again, I know I used to think that, the NRA, represented, the majority of gun owners. But as I've said, I see that their members are telling me, we want background checks. And most of them understand that the greatest threat to the Second Amendment is doing nothing. If we do nothing and more shootings happen, that's where the risk of, people just saying we've had enough and we're going to, go after the Second Amendment. So I think it's really incumbent upon gun owners to say, you know what, we take so much pride in our, in this right, that we're going to make sure that it's not abused. And so that's why I think we have to recognize and separate the signal from the noise when it comes to the NRA.
Great. And flashing back again quickly to this first meeting and this first time that I got to see you, you're not only talking the issues, you're almost talking them in the order that are of priority to me. I tell people that the most immediate danger that I see is this situation with journalists. Longer term, probably climate change, and you're addressing that up front. And then the thing that got to my heart a little bit, you wouldn't know this sitting, when I was sitting in the audience, but my sister died of ALS 3.5 years ago. And
I did not know that.
yeah, and you're actually wanting to turn some of this money around that's being spent in some other areas and put it into research for diseases like ALS and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
Yes, and I'm sorry to hear that, George. And my belief is that if we had taken the $1 trillion that went to tax cuts, where 83% of the benefits went to 1% of Americans, if we had a 10-year, $1 trillion Cures in Our Lifetime program, imagine what we could do to seek and find cures for ALS, Alzheimer's, cancer, Parkinson's, and other rare diseases. I want to be able to, if I do run, I'd want to be a president that could look every patient in the eye and say, we have put a whole generation of scientists to work, that they're seeking through genomics and data sharing and targeted therapies to find cures that will reduce the cost of healthcare, seeing it as a healthcare cost bend, but also extend the quality of life. And it's just very American, I think, to strive to want to do big things. And I'd like to see us do that again and not allow the healthcare debate to be defined solely as, is it Medicare for all versus free market system, but believe that we can go even bigger by trying to, seek and find cures.
Last question here, and you've been very generous with your time. Again, I appreciate you coming on. But here's a guy that 38 years old, and he's got a special connection, a special issue that's connected to FDR and, the famous four freedoms. Explain that a little bit about that. I thought that was great.
Yeah, so President Roosevelt is my favorite president. He's the one who inspires me the most because he addressed, threats from the outside, threats on the inside, a great world war and a great depression. And he met those challenges with optimism, but also a belief that if you invest in the American people and their grit and their spirit, that they can do great things. And so he did through public works projects and the greatest generation who went overseas and defended our country and our allies. But he also said in 1941 to Congress that every man, woman, and child in the world, having a recognition that it wasn't just here at home, but in the world, should have four freedoms: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from fear, and the freedom from want. And today we see that those four precious freedoms are under attack, with a wrecking ball being taken to them every day. The freedom of speech, of course, as you've alluded to, the president says the press are the enemy of the American people. The freedom of worship, in our great country with the Statue of Liberty as our symbol, we have a Muslim ban in place. The freedom from fear, we really should be calling it the freedom from fear-mongering, because the president invents a new scaravan every single week that's supposed to turn us against each other and declares a national emergency on the southern border. And then the freedom from want, to pay for the tax cuts for the wealthiest. You see Republicans proposing efforts to take from Medicare and Social Security to bring down the debt. So we have to restore those four freedoms. They've had this wrecking ball taken to them. But I think we should go so big and be so bold that we add a fifth freedom. And it's what I see as a uniquely American freedom, and that's the freedom to dream. It's the dream my parents dreamed, and then I'll go in the driveway when my dad would bring his police car home, and I'd say, Dad, I want to be a cop just like you. And he told me he wanted me to be the first in the family to go to college. And they believe that if you worked hard, you could do better and dream bigger. And so I want to see that promise of America expanded to as many as Americans as possible. And that starts in Iowa. So you will see me back in Iowa, whether it's Indianola, west of I-35, or, over near the river cities. But I'm going to be getting across the state and, look forward to listening to Iowans and, hearing, about their dreams and aspirations.
Ah, great. Well, keep carrying the flag. I just love it. And I want to thank you again and wish you well. And we'll keep an eye on it. We'll be back out there, and you can count me at the top of your list of supporters.
Thank you, George. And your listeners can follow me at Eric Swalwell, EricSwalwell on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I'll keep them updated as to where we are in Iowa.
Yeah, and when we post the podcast, I'll put that link on there so they can just click on it and go straight to it. That'll work for me. Representative Eric Swalwell today on another podcast. Bye, George.